Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. And on the program, we return to our All Things Africa edition, our journey across the continent and looking at the history and current affairs of each nation. We're continuing exploring Central Africa, and we now explore Congo. And no, not Congo, Zaire, Congo DRC, but Congo, which was a French colony, and the history of that country, which does neighbor my mother's country of the Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, Central African Republic, Uganda, and we are joined once again. It's our returning champion, the brilliant historian and journalist and activist Abayomi Azikiwe of Pan-African Newswire and also a frequent contributor to Black Agenda Reports, who will be our guide on this trip to Congo's history and current affairs. So, Abayomi, welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you so much for your continued interest and work around the African continent. And I think this should be a very interesting discussion. As you mentioned earlier, draw the distinction between the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Republic of Congo-Brazzaville, which has also undergone a lot of changes since the last 65 years when it gained national independence. But yes, this should be a very, very interesting discussion.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. And as always, folks, please donate generously to Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Report, and please donate generously, if you can, to One Plus One, and share all of our content, past and present. Help us overcome the far right algorithms, and help us overcome the monopoly in the rigged game Western corporate media and state media has in the social media world by sharing One Plus One's content, and again, donating to us. And now to the topic at hand. And actually, just before we get to the topic of the Congo, uh, as everybody knows, it's horrific what is going on in historic Palestine. And of course, One Plus One, along with all of our guests, our heart goes out to the Palestinian people. We all believe strongly in BDS. I'm certainly an advocate of the democratic, secular, one-state solution. So our heart goes off. Our heart goes out to the Palestinian people, and I know for a fact Abayomi works with a lot. He works with a lot of Palestinian brothers and sisters and the non-binary, and recently it's been on my radar. There is a very talented Palestinian activist. I believe her name is Maya Abdullah. She studies at UCLA, and she's actually been, I think this is day 7 of her going on a hunger strike, demanding UCLA engage in BDS with Israel. And now I personally am not an advocate of hunger strikes as a person myself who used to when I had mental health issues would not eat and stuff like that, especially when under so much stress I would not eat. Now it's the complete opposite. Now when I get very hyper or very depressed, I actually eat too much. So I'm not really in favor of people engaging in people engaging in hunger strikes. And having seen the very powerful documentary Hunger by Steve McQueen, which was about the IRA hunger strike in Northern Ireland, it's a pretty serious, extreme act of protest. But so I want people to please support Maya in her hunger strike, or if they can, try to convince her to do other forms of protests and stuff like that in order to have UCLA engage in BDS with Israel. And all that being said, I just want to say please to everyone, uh, you know if you know a Palestinian, please support that Palestinian friend or friend or even acquaintance as they go through numerous mental health problems and are plagued with intergenerational trauma and constant grief due to the Nakba and the current genocide Israel and its backers are facilitating. I will post a link to Maya Abdullah's Instagram. I believe she's an aspiring actress, so folks in the in the indie world, or anyone who actually might be working in Hollywood or even working in the British film industry or any film industry, please do hire Maya and write some incredible roles for this incredible person. So,
Yeah,
Don,
this is very
yeah,
important because yesterday represented the 77th anniversary of the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe
yeah,
or disaster, which was the recognition of the State of Israel as a legitimate entity by the United Nations in 1948, when the United Nations was dominated by colonial powers. And if that wasn't enough, they twisted arms and paid people off to vote in favor of recognition of the State of Israel. And of course, we know the State of Israel is just an outpost of U.S. imperialism and world imperialism in West Asia. So, yes, we should support them. Tomorrow, there's a demonstration here uh, acknowledging the 77th anniversary of the Nakba. And surely enough, these demonstrations are going to be going on all across the country and all across the world. Uh, just the last couple of days, over 100 Palestinians have been killed by the Israeli Defense Forces through bombings, other forms of massacres. So yes, we have to support the Palestinian people.
exactly. And we also we completely uh it's surprising that we do this, but it is something that us human beings do, which is we completely overlook the impact of people's mental health when it comes to not just the regular stress that we all experience in our lives and some personal problems that we that we may have, but the intergenerational trauma of that capitalism inflicts on people, that imperialism inflicts on people, no doubt PTSD and the intergenerational trauma that has, and of course, settler colonialism produces an abundance, an infinite amount of intergenerational trauma, all of the mental health that goes with that. So, again, folks, if you know a Palestinian, if you know a Congolese, if you know anyone who comes from a country which is the victim of Western imperialism, please do do help them out. Do let them know that they are not alone and that they have compassionate people that does that does care about them. So, and of course, as Abayomi, as you just mentioned, what Israel does in historic Palestine is of course very evil, is of course uniquely evil, but Israel's crimes against humanity don't end within its own borders and what they occupy. Although I think all of historic Palestine is occupied, but what I'm trying to say is that the evil Israel does on the Palestinians is not limited to the Palestinians. If we talk about Lebanon, recently Syria, uh, Egypt, which is under a right wing, a far right military junta. When we talk about what's going on in Congo, when we talk about Paul Kagame's endless reign of terror, when we talk about far right movements in Latin America, whether it was the Cold War or the present day, and when we even talk about many of the problems that plague Africa, the continent, Israel is a complicit actor in that. Israel is aligned with the West. They are aligned with pan-European imperialism. They are, I mean, you don't get all those arms from America, Canada, France, Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and not in return support their evil crimes of endless colonialism and whatnot. So again, folks, I mean, people should give a shit about Palestine, and but we do have to connect all of these problems together. They are not separate problems; they are all connected. So when you are protesting against, so if you are even having a hard time getting people to come to a Palestine demonstration, you just have to remind them that Israel is aligned with the evil empire of the U.S., Britain, Canada, France, Germany, the EU, NATO, and so forth. So when you're standing up for Palestine, you are standing up for Congo, you are standing up for Haiti, you are standing up for other countries that have the boot of Western imperialism literally on their necks. So
Exactly. And the settler colonialism that exists in Palestine also has existed in other parts of the world, including Africa. Look at the close links between Weizmann and Smuts during the early days of the Zionist movement and the formation of the Union of South Africa. They both looked at themselves as bringing, quote, Western civilization, unquote, to backward peoples and backward regions. People also have to keep in mind that the Zionists also looked at Uganda, which is in East Africa. They looked at Madagascar, which is off the coast of Southern Africa in the Indian Ocean, and also in the north of Africa in Libya as possible homelands for Zionism. Also, of course, Palestine was chosen. They claim for historical and religious reasons, but we know it is to control the influx and outflow of oil and other strategic resources from West Asia to Europe and North America. So it's clearly an imperial project.
Exactly. And yes, and we do have to step our games up. I think people are doing the best that they can. I for one have been very impressed with the consistent levels of protests that have been happening in Canada, parts of the United States, weekend protests daily, in Australia and elsewhere. But still, Israel is allowed to perform at Eurovision while Russia is literally blacklisted from Eurovision. The Cannes Film Festival, their opening ceremony. Apparently, they're doing some stand with Ukraine, but they're not engaging in BDS towards Israel, and you still can get into big trouble and be blacklisted and blackballed if you speak up for the Palestinians, or if you just present some inconvenient truth bombs and myth busts when it comes to Ukraine. But this is the
Yeah,
world we're living in, and
it
and
is.
and yet Gary Lineker, popular BBC sports journalist, although he's stepping down from covering football, soccer on the BBC, but as far as I'm concerned, only prominent, popular BBC personality, sports journalist from the West, and probably a journalist period from and if we're just talking about Britain alone and the global impact Britain and its media has, uh, to my knowledge, I think he's still the only person from the sports world, BBC world, and the football world that says Israel should be subjected to boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And look, he's not lost any popularity. In fact, I think he's even more widely popular. Roger Waters, look, I mean, like he still sells out stadium shows. So how people
Yes.
so again, how people can still even be afraid to speak out against Israel or say, okay, so I'll lose a quarter of this amount of fans, but I'll gain a lot more for speaking truth to power and speaking up for the powerless. Yeah, so yeah.
Yes.
And so anywho, and now on to the topic at hand, changing subject. Abayomi, so Congo-Brazzaville. So first question, as always, is talk to us about what was Congo like before French colonialism. Go right ahead.
Well, Congo, Brazzaville, not to be confused, as you mentioned earlier, with
Yeah.
the former Belgian Congo, Zaire, the Democratic Republic of Congo, uh, is located in Central Africa on the Atlantic coast. The Congo River divides the capital of DRC from the capital of the ROC, and it's right there on the west coast, on the Atlantic coast. And the history of Congo Brazzaville is highly interrelated with the DRC, with
Okay,
Angola,
interesting.
particularly northern part of Angola, and also Gabon and other states. I mean, the lines and the demarcations were drawn by the imperialists, uh, really beginning in the 16th century, and it was formalized in later centuries, particularly during the 19th century with the Berlin Conference, and then the formation of the various European companies. For example, the German East Africa Company we talked about several weeks ago in terms of the DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi. And of course, there was a Dutch West Africa company as well, which was involved in explorations in the West Africa and Central Africa region. There were in the area of Congo-Brazzaville civilizations and cultures and city-states that had developed prior to the intervention of France, Portugal, as well as Belgium. Of course, there was the one of the most well-known was the Congo kingdom, which existed there, going all the way back to at least the 13th century. They had city-states as well as kingdoms. They were involved in trade with other African states. And then later, beginning in the 16th, 17th century, they began to trade with the Portuguese and other European powers. They engaged in trade related to fabric, related to human trafficking, because you have conflicts going on between different groups. The capture of prisoners of war, which in many cases were transferred to the Portuguese and other European powers. This in turn weakened the internal fortitude or capacity of Africa to resist the European onslaught, which came in full force beginning in the 17th century all the way to the 19th century. When we talk about Congo-Brazzaville, we have to look at one individual. His name was Pierre Brazza, hence Brazzaville. He was an explorer. He had both Italian and French ancestry. He was made a citizen of France during the late 1800s, and he engaged in explorations, negotiations with traditional African societies, and he, in fact, set up ports and other installations for France in the Congo-Brazzaville region. Now, what happened was that Brazza, who came from Italy and France, stopped off in Algeria during his travels in the 1880s, and he witnessed, 1870s, witnessed a large-scale rebellion on the part of the Algerian people against French colonial occupation. Algeria was colonized initially in 1830 by France, and there had been consistent rebellions on the part of the Algerian people against French domination, which went all the way through the 19th century, into the 20th century. Then, of course, after World War II, the massacre of Algerians just one day after the defeat of Nazi Germany, when Algerians went out to demonstrate in support of the victory over Nazism and also call for the independence of Algeria. They were massacred. Thousands of people died. But back in the 1870s and 1880s, there was much exploration that was taking place in that region. We talked about Henry Morton Stanley, who was a US-based explorer, and he, of course, led the way for the exploration and then the exploitation of the area in what became known as the Belgian Congo. So Brazza negotiated with various groups inside of the Congo-Brazzaville region. And of course, later on, King Makoko Iliu I, had very close relations with the French. And he, in fact, became a representative of France in that particular region of the country, even prior to the proclamation of Congo-Brazzaville as an official colony of Paris. Now, he died in the 1870s, and his wife took over in his absence. And she, of course, was wined and dined by the French colonial authorities. And she was used really to facilitate the further penetration of French imperialism into the interior of the area that is now known as Congo Brazzaville. So Brazza was appointed as a governor general of Brazzaville between 1883 and 1883 and 1886. And then, of course, he was dismissed. They brought in a new governor general after that, a man by the name of Emile Gentile, who had a reputation of being a ruthless dictatorial colonial administrator. Now, Brazza, history has treated him a lot better in terms of his characterization as a more benevolent colonial administrator, although there's been controversy over that designation by modern day scholars. But of course, Emile Gentile
Well,
was.
interesting. I
Mhm.
guess I guess that's a perfect segue to this question. So do continue with what you were saying, but then
Yeah, go ahead.
and then talk to us then about what was Congo like when France colonized the country, and then my only follow up question is how did Congo achieve independence from France? Was it and was it distinct from that of Rwanda of Rwanda and Congo, if if there was any, how they were colonized compared to how the
Well,
Belgians
of course,
did it.
yeah, there were rebellions against the ruthless treatment of the French, particularly under Emile Gentile, beginning in the late 19th century. And of course, later on, uh, well, let's talk about the period leading up to World War One. The Queen, who had taken over after the death of the monarch who had developed close, King Mukaka, who had developed close links with the French imperialist system, actually helped recruit people from that region to support France during World War One and later during World War Two. But Emile Gentile was even endorsed. His ruthless behavior was endorsed by the Catholic Church. The bishop there, Prosper Philippe Anguard, endorsed this type of treatment. Now, what happened after the revolts against Gentile's treatment of the indigenous African people? There was a commission set up to investigate the atrocities that were being committed there during the late 19th century. And Brazza, interestingly enough, who had been terminated as governor general in earlier years, was a part of this investigative committee. And he wrote reports that were highly critical of the French colonial system during that particular time period. So he actually criticized the same government and the same colonial system which he was instrumental in establishing, although he had a different approach, a more I would say liberal approach to colonial administration. That's how he's viewed historically. But nonetheless, that report did not go to the actual heart of the colonial system in Congo-Brazzaville. It was clearly an exploitative system. They engaged in forced labor. They had an apartheid system where Africans were restricted in regard to their legal presence and social presence inside the colony. And as a result of that report that was issued by Brazza, they did make some reforms in regard to the situation inside the country. But nonetheless, it continued. The process continued. And France expanded, for example, their colonial empire in Africa. As I mentioned earlier, they were in Algeria. They were also in Guinea, Guinea-Conakry. They had colonies in Mali, which was known formerly as the former French Sudan.
Yeah.
So what they did, they formed an alliance of all these different, it was a federalized colonial system. And it was called the AEF, the French Equatorial Africa, which brought together Mali, Chad, what today is considered the Central African Republic, Gabon, and Brazzaville. Interestingly enough, Brazzaville was the capital of the French Equatorial African construct. So it was a very, very important area in terms of French imperialism. And now we have to go to World War II. To get to the independence struggle, we have to talk about what happened in France during World War II. In
Correct.
1940, of course, the German army entered France, and they got very little resistance from the French government and the French people who were not organized to resist Germany.
Yeah.
So what happened was Hitler came in, and he said, "Well, I'm not interested in enslaving the French people or dominating their society." He appointed a surrogate in the city of Vichy, yeah, a man by the name of Pétain.
Yes, who
And
was who was a famous World War I general. In fact, he was even considered a hero in World War I because of the victories. But yes, but this time around was a notorious collaborator with the Nazi regime. While Charles de Gaulle, and one can certainly criticize de Gaulle for his for a lot of
yeah,
colonial skeletons in his closet, racist skeletons in his closet, but he fled to Britain as a government in exile and so forth. So, yeah.
right, right. Yeah, so Marshal Philippe Pétain was the Nazis' person in France. And initially, the impact of the German occupation of France was not felt broadly within the colonies, but eventually it divided the allegiances. Those French who were loyal to the government that existed prior to 1940, and also to Charles de Gaulle, who headed the government in exile, and those who were loyal to the Vichy government. And the resistance developed during that particular time period. And Africans on the continent participated in the resistance against the Nazi occupation of France and, of course, its colonies as well. So there was the French Federation, which was formed. I mentioned that earlier. And they continued. Then when you had the intervention of Germany into France and the development of the resistance, Brazzaville actually became a symbolic capital of the French resistance. And in
Okay.
1944, there was a conference held there in 1944, the Brazzaville Conference, which really outlined the post-World War II colonial construct that took hold after the conclusion of the war in 1945. So Charles de Gaulle spoke at that conference, and they recommended reforms in the colonial system, setting up local parliamentary structures, allowing more Africans to serve as deputies within the French parliament, breaking down some of the segregation laws that had existed, becoming more liberalized in regard to forced labor, which took place in the French colonies in Africa as well.
But
So
now,
this went during World
and
War II.
but and that of course is very now given the time period we're talking about, probably socialists like you and I would probably welcome those kind of reforms, but would more critical anti-colonialists say, this is all fine and nice, but what they're really doing is just finding collaborators of the colonial system to have much more power. So, in other words, like the Indian colonial viceroys, many of them were
Mhm.
Indians, not British. Uh, and is that what Charles de Gaulle was suggesting that France do with its
Yes,
French colonies? So have colonial administrators, but let them not be white French people. Let them be black Congolese, black Gabonese, Senegalese, uh, brown Arabic Algerians, and so forth.
yes. And as I mentioned earlier, this had already been part of the French colonial policy by developing collaborators within the indigenous people. And in doing that, they were able to recruit Africans to serve in the French military during World War One as well as World War Two. And of course, in 1944, you had the Brazzaville Conference, which outlined all these reforms. And as you said, it was not enough. It clearly was not enough. And people realized that during the post-World War II period, you had the development of nationalist parties, national liberation movements across Africa. In some countries, you had the development of armed struggles. I mentioned in Algeria in 1945, the huge massacre of the Algerian people that killed thousands in Algeria to suppress that revolt. However, by 1954, they had formed what was known as the National Liberation Front in Algeria. And they led the armed struggle and the mass struggle from 1954 to 1962, which led to the liberation of Algeria. So this clearly had an impact on other French colonies on the continent. For example, in Cameroon, there was revolutionary groupings, the UPC, the Union of Cameroonian Peoples, led by Naoumbe and the others, who they, of course, were crushed, by the French intelligence, Ruben Naoumbe, and they were assassinated and imprisoned by the French colonial authorities. Similar situation in Congo-Brazzaville, as you had the development of political parties, national liberation parties during the 1950s. And of course, there was an effort to pit these different groups based on ethnicity against each other. And there was an effort to declare the Middle Republic of Congo independent, somewhat semi-independent in 1958. And various leaders emerged. Jacques Opengalt was one of the nationalist leaders who founded a group called the African Socialist Movement, the Mouvement Socialiste Africains. Then there was Felix Tshisekedi, who formed a group called the African Progress Party of Congo. And these parties were attempting to build a national liberation system during the late 1950s. In 1959, some of these leaders were jailed by the French colonial authorities. And of course, by 1960, they were forced to hold elections, and Fulbert Youri was elected as the first president of Congo-Brazzaville, and he served until 1963. And Youri was more or less a moderate leader. He led a group called the Democratic Union for the Defense of African Interests. Yet they were very pro-West, very pro-neo-colonial, and this caused a lot of consternation inside the country. He set up eventually a one-party state, which prompted a revolt on the part of the workers and the youth inside of Congo-Brazzaville. And in 1963, in August, there was an uprising there, and Youri was ousted, and he was replaced by a man named Alphonse Musamba Dabat, and he led the country between 1963 and 1968. Now, his political orientation, he said at the time, was towards scientific socialism. This is how they described it. So, yes. So it started to have an evolution towards the left, particularly after 1963. In 1968, this leader, Musamba Dabat, was overthrown. And then you had the ascendancy of Marion Ngouabi, who took over in 1968. He wanted to move the country even further to the left. And of course, he came up with a group called the Congolese Labor Party. That was the name of the party that he headed. And he led the country from the period of 1968 up until 1972, when there was an attempted coup. But eventually he was assassinated in 1977. And then in 1977, later in 1977, there was an interim government that came into existence by a man named Apango. Then in 1979, Denis Sassou Nguesso, who is still the head of state now in Congo-Brazzaville, he was ousted during the 1990s, but now has reemerged as the head of state. He came in office in 1979, and he moved even further towards the left in terms of alliances with the Soviet Union, Cuba, the German Democratic Republic, the People's Republic of China, and the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Well, perfect. Actually,
Yeah.
perfect. That's actually that's actually a perfect segue then to this question, which is talk to us
Yes.
about which is talk to us more about Congo during the Cold War, and how
Yes.
did France continue its colonialism, or what we call French imperialism and neocolonialism in Congo? Because I found, because this was amazing when when researching Congo, that according to Wikipedia from 1969 to 1992, Congo was, in their words, a Marxist-Leninist state. So,
Yes.
I'm curious your response on that. You were already sort of talking about it, so I'm curious your response on that state's legacy, the good, the bad, the ugly, if there's any, and how did and then my only follow up question is, how did the U.S., Canada, and places like Britain or Belgium, what's been their foreign policy then toward Congo during the Cold War period?
Yeah, the country's name was changed during that period in 1969 to the People's Republic of Congo-Brazzaville. And they wanted to build a Marxist-Leninist scientific socialist state. Interestingly enough, during that particular time period, the Black Panther Party, the faction that was so-called East Coast faction that was headed by Eldridge Cleaver and Kathleen Cleaver and Don Cox and the others, well, they went to Algeria in 1969 to set up an Afro-American Cultural Center. This took place during the first Pan-African Cultural Festival that took place in August of 1969. And they were invited, the Panther Party was invited to remain in Algiers, and they were given headquarters there, international headquarters, in the embassy that had belonged to the Vietnamese, the Republic of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. And they had their own embassy there. And this went on between 1969. Then in 1971, of course, there was a big split in the Black Panther Party.
Yeah.
Between the so-called West Coast and East Coast factions of the party. It wasn't exactly like that, but that's what happened. But the international section continued from early 1971 into 1972. After the split with Huey P. Newton and David Hilliard, those are the people who actually took over the Oakland Black Panther Party after early 1971. As I mentioned, the international section remained in Algiers, but they started having problems with the Algerian government in 1972. So they were looking to relocate out of Algiers, and one place they were looking at was Congo-Brazzaville. They actually took delegations there in 1971. But then in 1972, there was an attempted coup in Congo-Brazzaville that may have been related to the fact that they did not establish the international section in Congo-Brazzaville. And of course, after 1972, late 1972, the Algerian government shut down the international section of the Black Panther Party in Algiers. And we probably don't have time to get into all the dynamics of what happened in that incident.
Interesting, but we will be doing a
Yeah,
future program all about Algeria, which I'm quite fascinated about
yeah,
because actually
right.
too many people focus way too much on Algeria's war of liberation against France and not enough on post-colonial
Yes,
Algeria. So we will definitely be exploring the history of Algeria in the future.
yeah. So I just wanted to mention that that period during the 1990s, there was a lot of mass demonstrations and rebellions in various African countries demanding multi-party democracy. This is how it was described at the time. So many countries were forced into legalizing opposition political parties. Elections were held. This provided an inroad for the imperialists to come in and fund pro-Western, pro-liberalization parties. And that's what happened in Congo-Brazzaville. So you had Pascal Lasuba, who was elected in 1992. He served for 5 years inside the country, but he wanted to liberalize the economy, to move away from socialism, and to have more Western investment inside of Congo Brazzaville. Of course, this prompted an eventual civil war between supporters of the Congolese Labor Party and his right wing, pro U.S. and pro imperialist policies. So that happened between 1992 and 1997. And then we had the reemergence of Sassou Nguesso as the leader of Congo Brazzaville, where he remains today. But their position now is not as left wing as it was during the late 1960s, 1970s, all the way up to the early 1990s. Of course, in the late 80s, we had the collapse of the Comecon countries in Eastern Europe. They fell. Poland, Hungary, the German Democratic Republic, Bulgaria, Romania, all those countries, Czechoslovakia, collapsed and moved towards imperialism. And then the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. And for many years, it was in disarray. Russia itself was in disarray. So a lot of the countries that had been previously socialist oriented or non-capitalist development oriented began to liberalize their economies, move away from the notion of building a Marxist-Leninist or scientific socialist state. So the same situation happened in Congo-Brazzaville for 5 years, even when the current leader, Sassou Nguesso, Denis Sassou Nguesso, reemerged as leader. Their political and economic policies, domestically and internationally, are not necessarily the same as they were in decades past.
Interesting. So, I have to ask this question because you already sort of answered a couple of questions I had, which is how did the West, U.S., Canada, Britain, and Belgium, what was their foreign policy towards Congo during the Cold War? How did Congo fare during during the rise of the unipolar world of the U.S. and pan-European imperialism in France during the 90s? And same question, but talk to us about Congo in the early 2000s of the present day. So you've already sort of answered all of those questions briefly, but then let me ask then this follow-up question I wasn't planning on asking, which is the following. Now, clearly, when we look at footage of Congo post-independence, and the period of the struggle against neocolonialism, the Cold War, and even when we look at images of Congo now, like most of the continents of Africa, especially Black Africa, we see absurd levels of poverty, and we're talking extreme poverty and so forth like that. However, I do remember once Hugo Chavez, when John Pilger was interviewing him in his in the documentary The War on Democracy, Pilger talked about how despite a lot of efforts to alleviate poverty, we still see such visible extreme levels of poverty in Caracas or any parts of Venezuela.
Yes.
And Pilger wanted Hugo Chavez to respond. Why does so much extreme poverty still exist? And Hugo Chavez, I think, gave an interesting response, which is, he said that, of course, we are of course, the issue of poverty is very dear to us, and we are trying our best efforts to eradicate extreme poverty. But the goal of our socialism isn't so that we can live, like America, the American dream, where everybody is living in, where so many people are living in big mansions, while there are while there are still levels of unacceptable levels of homelessness and stuff like that. And I thought that was an interesting answer. I remember watching my friend Pitta's 6-part docu-series on Canadian foreign policy, the past and present of Canadian imperialism. The last episode was all about Canada and Haiti, where Canada. Oh, this is where you get Canadian imperialism at its most naked, aggressive, genocidal, just like historic Palestine. And Justin Pordor, very interesting historian and journalist, was saying that during Jean-Bertrand Aristide's 2 very brief periods where he was allowed to be democratically elected and was allowed to, implement socialist policies, he says that during both of those very brief periods, the Haitian poor experienced a civilizational upgrade as opposed to a civilizational downgrade. And that after the coup against Aristide, both in the 90s, but especially in 2004, the levels of extreme poverty and all of the horrendous things that we know exists within within poverty skyrocketed like you wouldn't believe. So I thought that was interesting. So when we do examine African countries like Congo or Tanzania or Eritrea, all of these in one shape, form, or another are trying to produce socialism. Some would say Marxist-Leninism or anything like that. So there still is a lot of poverty in those places, but are the policies of poverty alleviation or certainly helping the working class get a bit of a raise and so forth? I guess my question, in a nutshell, is have their policies done actually a lot of good, even though they've not completely eradicated extreme poverty? I'm curious your response to that.
Well, in reference to Congo-Brazzaville, their major export is petroleum, and a lot of it is extracted offshore. It's 60% of the gross domestic product. So it has uplifted the living standards of the people, but still poverty exists inside the country, just like other African countries. Even the ones that are considered middle income, you still have these problems. But I think there needs to be a stronger and more rapid movement towards socialist construction, as we saw in China, for example. 76 years since the Chinese Revolution, they've almost eliminated poverty inside the country. I was talking to someone last evening on a similar interview on African affairs, and this person told me they believe that China had already outstripped the United States due to its innovation, its ability to influence international affairs,
Yeah.
and so forth. So yes, I think if these states could maintain a socialist-oriented trajectory, I think they could go a long ways to alleviating poverty inside of these countries. Africa today has an estimated 1.4 billion people. About 70% of them are young people, under the age of 25. So the potential is enormous in regard to labor power, intellectual power, and this is what's worrying the Western imperialist states, is because the populations in Africa and Latin America and many Asian countries are growing enormously. The people of color communities inside the United States are growing exponentially. So this is where this right-wing notion of an invasion is taking place in the United States, that the U.S. has to abolish birthright citizenship, which is tantamount to nullifying the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution, because it was our ancestors that prompted the passage of the 14th Amendment. It was 4.5 million Africans who, after 1865, with the Union victory in the Civil War, they had to figure out what to do with us. The 13th Amendment ostensibly freed us from involuntary servitude, although there's a clause in there that says,
yeah,
if you're convicted of a crime and are in prison, you can be subjected to involuntary servitude. So now when you have over 2 million people incarcerated in the United States, half of them, if not more, are Black and brown people. So you do have slavery operating just under a different name. Then in 1866, there was the passage of the first Civil Rights Act, which was a sweeping act that really provided for protections and equal opportunity and so forth. But then in 1868, it was necessary to pass the 14th Amendment, which ostensibly made African citizens of the United States by granting them due process under the law, the right to serve on juries, the right to participate in civil society, to have access to public facilities and so forth. Then in 1870 was the passage of the 15th Amendment, which ostensibly gave Africans the right to vote in the United States. So I'm saying all that just to point out that it's been a process of development. Now they want to go backwards and say that the 14th Amendment should not exist simply because you're born in the United States doesn't make you a citizen of the United States. So you can be subjected to forced labor, to
well, I wasn't planning on asking this, forgive me, audience, as we go a little bit off topic with Congo.
Okay.
I'm not.
But this is related to
but,
related to post-independence
exactly.
Africa as well.
Now, I'm not throwing my questions on Congo, but I did have. But let me quickly ask you this: what do you say to MAGA Republicans? What do you say to the far right and so forth, the libertarians and so forth, and even a right-wing Democrat who says, "Listen, we cannot have people coming to the United States, and if they happen to give birth, automatically their kids are an American citizen, but they themselves are not a citizen, and they have to go through all the rigorous bureaucracy and all of the rigorous years of actually living in the U.S. in order to get their own passport. So us ending birthright citizenship is actually leveling the playing field." I'm curious your response to that.
Well, what about the British that came here in the 17th century? The Scottish that came, later the Germans, the Italians, the French. Didn't they get birthright citizenship? Of course they did. But we're talking about people of color. We're talking about Africans, Asians, people from Latin America, people who have Arab or West Asian backgrounds, indigenous people in North America. These are the people they want to say should not have birthright citizenship because they're afraid that by the next decade and a half, it is estimated that people of color communities combined collectively will be a majority over those of European American ancestry. Now, if those people come together as a united front, even on an electoral basis, they could form a left-wing party, a Labor Party, a National Liberation Party, and it would be very difficult for them to be controlled by the political apparatus of the United States. That's why they want to reinstitute a form of Jim Crow, of apartheid, which will strip many people of the right to vote, the right to participate in politics, to serve on juries, to be subjected to due process under the law, that they just can't arrest you and take you outside and string you up and burn you at the stake. And this happened even after the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So these are all elements of the political character within the Western imperialist countries today. We talked about in the past the widespread exodus from Africa across the Mediterranean into Europe, which is fueling right-wing sentiment against migration. The similar situation is happening in the United States, where they've militarized the southern border. But all of this is related to maintaining European imperialist control, not only of North America, not only of Europe, but the entire globe, because they realize that their days are numbered. You have formations that are coming about, the non-aligned movement, the Group of 77 plus China, BRICS, and other alliances that are coming into existence, which are talking about de-dollarization, the need to develop new financial institutions to help lift countries in the global south completely out of poverty. So yes, this is very, very important to see the connection.
In fact,
between the rightward shift that is going on in Europe and in North America.
And actually, going back to Congo, how are Congo's,
yes.
How are Congo's relations both historically and presently with Russia and China and BRICS collectively? And seeing as on paper, Congo is supposed to be ruled by a Marxist-Leninist, Communist Party. Now, if this party actually practiced what their manifesto, what their own party literature preaches, would Congo would Congo currently ends up being more like Cuba without Western sanctions, or even Vietnam? I'm curious your response to that.
Yeah, I think it would be, but a number of these countries, as I mentioned before, have lessened their emphasis on socialism, scientific socialism, and Marxism-Leninism. And we've seen the same pattern in Angola, in Mozambique as well. So, yeah, this is not something that's just isolated to Congo-Brazzaville. Now, Cuba has had a strong relations with Congo-Brazzaville for decades. In fact, they even had military forces there that helped suppress an attempted coup that had taken place during the 1970s. And they have very good relations with the Russian Federation as well. So you have to judge it on that basis. But to say it's a perfect country or that it's a socialist country, no, we cannot say that, even though I think the government of Denis Sassou Nguesso is better than other previous governments like Pascal Lissouba, who was very right-wing oriented. Even though his party claimed to be a Pan-Africanist party, they were still oriented towards Western investment and a more liberalized approach domestically as well as internationally.
Fascinating. And is France, stupid question, but is France still trying to maintain neo-colonial influence in Congo-Brazzaville, or does France take more of a, okay, we'll leave this current country alone and focus more on where we really do have a lot of influence, or do French businesses with the French government as a middleman still play a very reactionary role in Congolese affairs? Because as you mentioned, even though Congo is supposed to be this radical socialist state, it has it has done the bidding of Western imperialism, has allowed Western multinational corporations run roughshods over over its sovereignty and over its people. I'm curious your response.
Yeah, well, France is desperate right now, and they're trying to enhance and shore up relations with Congo-Brazzaville based upon the losses that they've suffered further to the north, particularly in the AES Sahel states, being Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. They've also been asked to leave Chad as well as Cote d'Ivoire, interestingly enough, militarily.
Oh, wow.
In Gabon, for example, which is in a neighbor of Congo-Brazzaville, the Bongo family was overthrown um, a year and a half ago, and they just elected a new president, Nguema, who was a military leader who took off his military fatigues and put on a suit
Yeah.
and ran for office and won overwhelmingly inside the country. And it remains to be seen what their position is going to be, along with Senegal, which is also a former French colony. The new president there, President Faye, has also asked for French troops to leave Senegal. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen in Congo-Brazzaville. But France is trying to enhance relations with its former French colonies because they're under fire in so many countries, particularly in further up north and northwestern part of Africa. Algeria, the relationships are very bad between Algiers and Paris. Very bad. Withdrawing of diplomats, the refusal to recognize on the part of France the atrocities committed during the anti-colonial war, where at least over 1 million people were killed, some say more. Even Macron said that was an exaggeration. Algeria didn't exist prior to French colonialism. All these type of insulting comments does not bode well for good relationships between their former colonies and themselves.
And Abayomi, and wasn't there during the very bloody Algerian War of Independence, wasn't there uh, uh, a huge solidarity protest for the Algerians that were fighting to liberate their country from the French colonialists, and the French police and French military basically like engaged in one huge I mean we're talking
Massacre.
Kent, yeah, we're talking Kent State times 100, like massacred
Right.
a lot of the a lot of the people protesting, and those who were injured, they simply took them and like threw them in the rivers. So folks, if you visit Paris, and there's a wonderful tour you can do on the boat, which shows you,
Mm.
Paris like that with a touring guide. And there's a famous bridge when when you cross from one part of Paris to another, where folks have romantic locks and keychains and so forth. So the French police and the French military literally were massacring French Algerians that were standing in solidarity with their brothers and sisters, elders in the non-binary in Algiers, and literally did a bloody massacre. And this is something which the French media and even French academia, French history rarely acknowledges. They will acknowledge that, yeah, okay, we did some awful things, in trying to suppress Algerian independence, but they tend to completely, censor this part of their history, a huge massacre that took place on French soil. Yeah, you're a smart.
Yeah, they say, well, it wasn't as bad as the Algerians said it was. This is their response, which is an inadequate response. And that incident, I believe, happened in 1961. Was approaching the conclusion of the Algerian War of National Liberation, and it's estimated that it could have been thousands of people that were killed. We know hundreds of people definitely were killed in Paris during those demonstrations in solidarity with the Algerian FLN, the National Liberation Front in Algeria. So yes, these things have gone on in France, and in more recent times, we can look at the suppression of the rebellions that took place there during the period when the young North African youth was killed. That was in 2022. And there were national uprisings that occurred throughout France. And of course, there's been rebellions in New Caledonia, which is a overseas French colony
Yeah.
in the South Pacific, in Martinique. for example, in the Caribbean, which is still a French colony. There have been rebellions and strikes there as well. So they still have a continued. Mayotte is another one in the Indian Ocean, which is still a French colony, which is part of the Union of Comoros, even though they're not allowed to declare their independence. So yeah, they're still using repression up until this day. So we could go back, to the 19th century all the way up to the 21st century, and we can still see French imperialism utilizing coercive methods to maintain their interests in all their colonies and neo-colonies.
But
And that's why there's
funnily enough, this is going to surprise you. I was watching on C-SPAN. C-SPAN has lots of really it's a treasure trove if you're a history buff.
yeah,
And I
right.
was watching Jean-Marie Le Pen, the far right French figure who used to head the National Front. Now it's called the National Rally or something like that.
Yeah, his daughter heads it now, right?
Yeah,
Marine
exactly,
Le
exactly.
Pen,
It's
who was disqualified supposedly from standing in the next elections. We'll see if that stands. Yeah.
exactly. And when he led that party, which his daughter inherited, his daughter kicked him out of the party because of a lot of anti-Semitic comments that he was known to have made. But I was listening I was listening to this speech of Jean-Marie Le Pen, and it's quite interesting because his daughter is a lot like him, except on economic matters, he's way like to the right, whereas she is more to the left. On foreign policy, she is definitely an aggressive anti-imperialist. Even thinks NATO is obsolete, although is a Zionist. Jean-Marie Le Pen was one of the few voices in Europe that actually spoke out against the First Gulf War and thought France should not have joined the First Gulf War because he thought that Saddam Hussein was a great modernizer for Iraq, knew how to keep Islamic terrorists in line and stuff like that. And towards the end of this speech of Jean Marie Le Pen, very much a nationalist, although all French politicians are nationalists. But towards the end of his speech, he said the following. He said that France should cancel the debts of its former French colonies and allow those former French colonies to reach their potentials and to advance their economies. To which I thought, whoa. Let me tell you, Abayomi, as a guy who watched a debate between Ségolène Royal and Sarkozy, or Lionel Jospin and Chirac, I have never ever heard a socialist say, we should cancel the debt of our African countries. We should pay reparations to Haiti for ripping them off. And all of the mess that we've done in the Middle East, supporting Zionism, supporting this reactionary government or that reactionary government, we should pay reparations to the people. So I'm curious your response on that.
Yeah, I remember the first Gulf War. George Bush Sr., he sent hundreds of thousands of U.S. troops beginning in 1990 to Kuwait. And of course, when they took over, when Iraq took over Kuwait, what happened? They sent them to Saudi Arabia and other areas in the West Asia region. I remember in '91, leading up to the war, there were huge demonstrations, and the right wing in France were there marching right alongside people on the left opposing the war. But I believe they were doing it not for the right reasons, but for the wrong reasons. Just like Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans say they want to end the war in Ukraine, not for the right reasons, but for the wrong reasons. And that's why they have not been successful. They want access to those critical minerals that exist in Ukraine. They want to end the war in Ukraine in order to focus more attention on undermining the People's Republic of China and Iran. So no, I don't trust their views in regard to the situation as it developed in Iraq, and that is one of the most anti-migrant parties that exist in Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have, of course, fostered other, anti-immigration parties in Western Europe as well. So I don't trust their rhetoric. Like, for example, Trump said he wanted to end the war in Ukraine. He was going to end it in 24 hours. It's still not over. He's been in office now for nearly 4 months. So we'll see what happens. But I do not see them as the liberators that they claim to be. Yemen, for example, he started bombing the ports in Yemen, and it didn't work. So he declared a ceasefire with Yemen, interestingly enough. But we'll see if that holds as well. And the ceasefire with Yemen said that no, the Yemenis said they won't attack the U.S. Vessels anymore in the Red Sea, but it did not include Israel. So he left Israel out of this agreement with the resistance movements in Yemen. So it's a very confusing situation. But I believe that all these anti-immigration parties that exist in the US and in Western Europe only want to focus attention on ridding their own nations of people of color and also undermining the status of the People's Republic of China and Iran, particularly in West Asia.
A lot of truth to that, and yeah, no, and in fact, it's very hard to even push back against that, which I think is why lefties or certainly left-leaning people should be very careful with the whole calls of a whole left-right alliance and and so forth like that. Which I once upon a time actually did believe that. Now I actually don't, because I find that folks that do engage in that sort of strange bedfellow friendship always winds up becoming much more right wing and reactionary after spending whatever amount of time they do with our libertarian brothers and sisters.
Yeah, there was I'd say about 15 years ago. There's a peace group in the U.S. And they were talking about some type of left-right alliance against the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It didn't go that far at all. And then the same group, when the special military operations started over 3 years ago in Ukraine on the part of the Russian Federation, they were calling for the Russian troops to pull back, to get out of Ukraine and so forth. Their position now is a little bit different. So it's a lot of people, particularly in the Western countries, that can get, caught up in this type of mentality. There were people in the last election who were thinking that Trump would be better off, would be a better leader than Kamala Harris because he wanted to end the war in Ukraine. Well, he hasn't ended the war in Ukraine, and he's actually intensified international tensions, even with allies such as Canada and the Kingdom of Denmark and others. The European Union, he's demanded that they pay more money in regard to their defense. So these are not anti-war sentiments. These are policies that will, in fact, fuel greater tensions and even more wars throughout the world.
Oh yeah, exactly. And in fact, and sometimes it is fair to say that that amongst the left, the anti-imperialist left, yes, there is a problem amongst the left with them being selectively anti-war, anti-imperialist. Some are much more in favor of sanctions and embargoes than actual militaries. Some still have very weird views on NATO, that NATO is a benevolent uh, started off as a benevolent thing, and if we just got rid of our mean, American, empires, certainly the Republican wing, NATO, would be, NATO's a necessary evil. You have some who are even supportive of the idea of containing China, pivot to Asia. so there is that problem on the left. When it comes to the libertarians and the anti-war right or the anti-imperialist right, they also have their problems with being selectively anti-war as opposed to being consistently anti-war. So while they might be great on no war with Iran, many are terrible when it comes to BDS on Israel. Many of them do support the sanctions of mass destructions on North Korea. Don't have anything to say about Haiti. Don't there's that problem as well. There is that problem. So there is that problem as well, which is why, in general, we definitely need much more. We definitely need to be even more aggressive on our political education towards people who are left leaning, open to the ideas of being, anti-imperialist, but not just the use of the military, but also the use of sanctions. So we have to we have to engage more in political education, even if we feel that we've already told this story again. There's always new people to the movement that do need to be educated and whatnot.
Exactly. Yeah, and the special military operation is a clear example of that. Even many within the so-called, quote, anti-imperialist left in the United States did not defend. Russia did not understand the rationale behind that intervention and did not place the onus of responsibility for the war on U.S. imperialism and the U.S. and the European Union. That position is starting to weaken now, but it's a problem now because Trump is perceived as a supporter of Vladimir Putin, the president of the Russian Federation, which I believe is false. It's a total distortion of what's going on. So some people now are saying, yeah, support Ukraine. At some of these demonstrations, the hands-off demonstrations, some people had Ukrainian flags and they were pro-NATO, So these are the contradictions that we're going to have to be dealing with in this period. The anti-Trump movement also has a tendency to be supportive of Ukraine. So it's a very confusing situation, but as you said, as anti-imperialists, we have to intervene in these debates and uphold a genuine, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist position in regard to U.S. intervention. NATO is an imperialist construct, and it needs to be destroyed. It should not be preserved on the basis that it is against the Russian Federation.
Yeah, and the other day, your fellow Black Agenda Reports contributor John Jeter, good friend of mine, he was posting something about Syria, about how the final days where the Western imperialists were advancing and had penetrated the Syrian military. So they were deliberately sabotaging communications between Assad and his military, many of them who were defecting over to the Western imperialist side and trying to sabotage efforts to conserve the Syrian Arab Republic. Bill Fletcher, said something about, Assad being, brutal dictator. And I politely had to push back against that and just had to, again, explain that Syria was a victim of Western imperialism and had every right to defend itself, and Russia was not acting as an inter-imperialist, as some people like to throw that term. No, Russia was defending international law and was defending Syria's sovereignty by trying to defend it from Western-backed Islamic far-right death squad is Islamic extreme Sunni proxies. Now,
yeah, unfortunately, labor leaders like Bill Fletcher, who come out of the AFL-CIO, that old AFL-CIO position in the terms of defending U.S. foreign policy, irrespective of its character, is unfortunate. And he did the same thing with Zimbabwe, attacking the ZANU-PF government for their land reform program 25 years ago, and other issues as well. I'm sure he's anti-China, and of course he would be anti-Russia, but these positions lead nowhere. They lead the working class in the United States right back into the camp of imperialism. It actually provides a rationale for the continuation of imperialism and capitalism inside the United States. So uh, hopefully, the working class organized groupings will take a different turn. They are taking a different turn. None of them participated in May Day this year, which was a new step, for the top level organized labor unions. Even some
Yeah.
of these skilled trades also participated. So that's a very, very important development. And hopefully, the old AFL-CIO and the U.S. aid, which has pretty much been abolished, the alliance between the two of them are on the decline, and that organized labor must support, progressive forces in the global South and throughout the world.
And actually, final thing about that before I get to to my final question regarding Congo and its relations to the rest of the continent and so forth, is you know socialism itself. It's such a radical idea. It's a beautiful radical idea. The idea that the working class get to enjoy the benefits of the fruits of their labor. The idea that we do not have exploitation in the workplace.
Right.
Like the fact that we don't have the fact that you do not have institutional office place bullying and stuff like that. Socialism, just the idea that people have the right to collectively bargain how much they work and stuff like that, and demand from the government that they have the proper adequate protection if they're a garbage collector, if they are doing mining, if they are extracting, coal and oil and stuff like that. Socialism, it's a very beautiful radical idea. That being said, I think it still scares the establishment. It still scares the capitalists to its core, that idea of socialism, which I think is why you have so many far right parties all have, in their manifestos now, all these things. If you're working class, you should be supporting us because we have this, which is going to benefit you. We have, if you're a struggling single parents, we have this, single child tax credits and stuff like that. Or you have right wing parties going to certain unions and say, look, you support us, we'll defend your right to strike, and we'll make sure that that your business actually does increase your wages and stuff like that. And there's a new communist party that was founded in the U.S. by this guy Jackson Hinkle, who's very right wing. Like, he is so, like, there's really no other way to describe it. But the fact that he calls himself an American communist, the fact he talks about MAGA communism and stuff like that, I think goes to show you that there are so many people afraid of some either peaceful or violent revolution around the corner, that there's a lot of efforts to confuse people, take overly simplistic ideas of socialism and so forth. I mean, even Bernie Sanders engages in it to a degree and so forth. I'm curious your response on that, and also this is this is not abnormal. I mean, the Nazis were called National Socialists for a reason.
Socialist Workers
try to
Party of
dupe
Germany. Yeah,
to
right.
try to dupe the working class into supporting their very reactionary agenda. So I'm curious. I'm just curious your response before I get to the
That
final.
happens. Benito Mussolini was the editor of the Socialist Party of Italy's journal, and he wasn't kicked out until he took a position in support of World War One, which was contravened what the party had already decided. And
I
the same
did
thing
not
with
know
Adolf Hitler.
that. That is fascinating, interesting.
Yeah, and yeah, he went all the way over to the right and supported World War One, and of course became a fascist. You know, probably the founder of the fascist movement, as an organized political structure. But yes, and we have the same problem with Donald Trump, who says his policies support the American working class. It's totally outrageous that he says that. But this is what he advocates. And unfortunately, the president of the UAW, Shawn Fain, who had an image as a leftist when he first came into office, who led the stand-up strike in the fall of 2023, made a statement that he supported selective tariffs related to the auto industry because it would assist them in reaching full capacity in the plants. Well, the corporate media picked up on that statement and made it appear as if he was an ally of Donald Trump and his tariff policy. So Shawn Fain had to go and do a live stream to try to walk back these perceptions that are out there. That was even said over the BBC, that Trump had found a partner in the personage of the president of the United Auto Workers, Shawn Fain, who supports his position on tariffs. And of course, tariffs are causing all kinds of problems inside the United States, slowing down production, raising prices, even though they claim the rate of inflation is not increasing. In reality, it is. Things are going up, and people are being laid off their jobs in the United States. And many of the service sectors are suffering huge setbacks. So, same thing with Adolf Hitler. The German Socialist Workers' Party claimed that it supported the middle class and the working class. And in fact, their policies were disastrous for the working class people in Germany. So yeah, this is going on, and it will continue to go on. And in the United States, you do have groups that claim to be socialists, that claim to be communists, but their practice are definitely right-wing, and in fact could be agents of the U.S. government, as far as we know.
Not uncommon, and I think
Yeah,
I think it also goes to show, when we also, when we look at unions shamefully supporting right wing parties, or or slobbering themselves and and endorsing Democrats in the U.S., the Liberal Party in Canada, Labor in Australia, Labor in England, Labor in New Zealand, which uh, continue to govern from the right and so forth. I think it just goes to show you that, first of all, never ever underestimate the power of money and influence peddling and so forth. But also, when it comes to stuff like anti-communist leftism, or people saying that they support this clearly far right grifter, but look, he's talking about the working class and so forth like
right.
that. And
Yeah,
I think it just goes to show you. And actually, a member of a union in Britain said, said the following when I asked a question about why are some unions great on Palestine, but then there are very reactionary on China, or they're pro NATO, but you can get a bunch of them to demonstrate against the Iraq War and stuff like that. She gave a very honest answer, which is
yeah,
which is the following, guys. Unions are people just like you and I. These are people who, in desperate conditions, join a union because they want somebody to protect their job and to fight for their wage increases. But unions are not, places where everybody is automatically a Marxist or even a leftist.
no,
So they're people like you and I. They're people that you have to educate on on any topic, and you know do that enough, a union will be filled with well informed members. Don't do it, and you get what we get with some unions still not engaging in BDS, or some unions still uh, had to be kicked, dragged, kicking and screaming to speak for the working class of Indonesia who are being exploited, to speak out on genocide in East Timor or apartheid South Africa. So
yes, yeah, it's a process.
And
most definitely.
final question before I let you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Going back to Congo. Sorry, folks, if we got a bit off topic. My final question is Congo's relations with the rest of the continent. I'm interested primarily its relations with Congo, Zaire, and DRC, its policies regarding Rwanda's endless aggression towards Congo, its relations with Burundi and Uganda and Kenya, and its response to the you talked about a lot, the new wave of anti-French imperialism being advanced. And the Western Gulf War destruction, civilizational downgrade of Libya. And is the left very strong in Congo, both in terms of political power and popular movements, or I mean, you already mentioned that the Congolese government has unfortunately been very right leaning, but is it a right wing country like Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, my own country of Congo, which also is led by leftists, but they govern like right wingers, and Burundi, particularly during the Cold War? I'm curious your response to that.
Yeah, it's complicated. I think it's better in terms of the politics of what is shaped in Kenya, for example, or Nigeria,
Yeah,
where they've actively suppressed working class demonstrations just over the last year. But at the same time, it's not a socialist state that it has aspired to be during the 1960s, 70s, and even up to the early 1990s. So it's a mixed bag, so to speak. Um, the country is relatively stable at this point, but at the same time, they still have to tackle impoverishment. They have to figure out how to relate to the AES states and other insurgencies, I mean, left wing insurgencies that are taking place across Africa. So it remains to be seen how that's going to work itself out over the next few months and years in Congo-Brazzaville. But economically, it has a lot of potential because of the petroleum industry. But at the same time, still a lot of uncertainty internationally. We don't know what the long-term impact is going to be on the Trump tariffs. If there's a general economic collapse inside the United States, it's going to impact the entire world.
interesting. Here's hoping, especially with the anti-French imperialism spring, this African spring that's happening. Here's hoping that the Congolese government goes back to its radical roots and, like Tanzania, tries to advance socialism with African characteristics, or particularly Congolese characteristics. But alrighty, well, I think it's the perfect place to end. Well, we were joined on this edition of One Plus One with Abayomi Azikiwe, journalist and historian of Pan African Newswire and Black Agenda Reports. Donate generously to both those outlets, as well as One Plus One, and again, share widely all of One Plus One's content, past and present. Subscribe to us, click the bell so that we appear on your emails when we do drop an episode, and donate to us. And join us next week in our journey across the African continent, where we'll be exploring Central African Republic. So all my best until then, folks. Have a great weekend. Good night and good luck. And again, show strong solidarity to Palestinians. If you know a Palestinian friend, acquaintance, or whatnot, please make sure to help them as they're going through a lot of mental health struggles and so forth. And I will make sure to send the link of Maya Abdullah so that folks can support her and whatnot. And until then, ciao, folks. Abayomi, thank you so much, and all my best. And hope you guys enjoyed this episode about Congo.
All right.